Yamiche, I want to start with this national picture of a purge in the House Republican caucus of Liz Cheney from her leadership post. And this sort of all these proof points that the conduct and the repeating of the big lie, the walking back the truth that Kevin McCarthy has done, the outrageous performances today by the woman who would like to replace Liz Cheney, Elise Stefanik, talking about the big lie as enthusiastically as Donald Trump did, and acting like the insurrection never happened, acting like Trump supporters didn't mutilate police officers and law enforcement officials at the Capitol, and using it to push through voter suppression laws, using it for this off-the-wall, bonkers faux audit in Arizona. Is anyone concerned about where this is heading?
I think everyone is concerned about where this is heading, especially even some Republicans, those Republican secretaries of states who said over and over again during the 2020 election that the votes were not fraudulent, that this was not an election that was at all close, that Joe Biden, in fact, won by millions and millions of votes. But what you see in the Republican Party is a Republican Party that is in some ways wrestling with itself because you have a former president in President Trump who simply cannot let this go and who has the power in the party in a way that is really making all of the other Republicans who want to continue to have a lot of political power stand in line. So you think of someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been ousted now from her committees. She still has all of this fundraising. So that signals to Republicans around her she is the way forward in this party. She is the way forward talking to these Republican-based voters. In talking to people, especially people that worked in the 1960s who were voting rights activists, they tell me that this is voter nullification, that we should be using that word, because what you see here is not just voter suppression, where you see people targeting and trying to make it harder to vote. What's happening here in Arizona, possibly in other states, is really an auditing of the vote to look at people who they don't like how they voted and to take that out. That is something that people tell me is just very, very scary, talking to activists who bled and almost died for voting rights in this country. So that's what we're up against. It's a party that is dealing with and leaning toward voter nullification.
Well, and Ryan, when you look at who they're recruiting to carry out the faux audit and perhaps some of these voter contacts, they're not recruiting from both sides of the ideological spectrum. Your reporting is really the scariest of the day. The effort to recruit people to count ballots for the ongoing audit of Maricopa County's presidential election results appears targeted in part at traditionally conservative groups. And some of the recruiters themselves appear to have far-right political leanings. One recruiter is a retired police officer who works as an investigator for an extremist right-wing group that warns of, quote, the growing threat of the Marxist and Islamic movement in America. Another person involved in recruitment used her brief stint as the county Republican Party chairman to try to get Trump back in office by protesting the results of one of the county's prior audits. So it's not just voter nullification of any old Arizonan. It is a very ideologically driven effort there. And I wonder if you can update us since your last appearance about how it's going and what's going on in that room other than the hunt for bamboo.
Well, there's still some very slow counting going on, not fast enough, because as you noted, they are going to be kicked out of that building next week for some high school graduations. And the fairgrounds say that they are not welcome to extend that lease. So I expect some sort of a fight there over whether or not they can store these ballots somewhere and then resume counting after the graduation ceremonies. But we have press there. We do have press access now in agreement with the Senate Republicans. So there are different journalists from television, newspapers, radio, with eyes on the floor every day. And every day there seems to be a new revelation about who they recruited and what they're looking for and how they're doing it.
Does anyone, Ryan, think that what they're doing is above board? In that, does anyone think that there were unanswered questions from the previous 3 recounts?
Well, the people on the floor, the ones that were recruited to do this, clearly believe in their cause. I mean, you mentioned that they had recruited sort of extremists to participate in this, and that's because those are the people. I mean, it makes sense. Those are the people that had questions about this. Most of the moderate Republicans in the state don't think that there was a need for this. I've heard from hundreds of people in the past week after reporting who was on the floor doing the counting that they just don't think that this was necessary. And now they're concerned that, some people with questionable backgrounds are on the floor handling machines, handling ballots. And what is the point of all that? You've got people who believe in their hearts that there was fraud, and they're the ones now doing the counting. And some of our reporting has noted that they talk amongst themselves. So they're supposed to be counting and agreeing on a number when they count 100 ballots at a time. But they're mingling and chatting with each other between here. It just doesn't seem like it's extremely strict protocols aimed at just counting ballots. In some ways, it's almost a social affair. On my short time on the floor before I was kicked out, I witnessed people who were waiting like 15, 20 minutes to do anything before ballots would be brought to them. So, again, not really happening fast enough, and not a lot of confidence that what those folks are doing is going to come out with an accurate result.
I just want to press you, Ryan, on this, what you just said. There are people who believe in their hearts there were fraud. That's a belief, I'm sure, but it's not a fact. It's not a fact that undergirds anything happening in that room. So the whole exercise is post-fact, anti-fact. Is there growing concern that this fact-immune exercise being carried out by fact-immune people is going to lead to distrust of what a Republican governor, a Trump ally, certified the vote after 3 recounts? Why is this still going on?
Well, you nailed it. There is distrust. There is no evidence there was any problem with the election. There is no evidence in the hand recounts of statistically significant numbers of ballots afterwards, yet these people still believe without evidence that there is a problem. And so the people that believe most there's a problem are the ones now looking for something. It just seems very likely that they're going to come up with something, whether it's there or not. And, we don't know what they're doing even with all of the equipment, because we've won access for the press to be there and for observers to be there, but we don't really know what data they took out of the voting equipment, for example. And more importantly, we don't know where this is going later. They have discussed trying to certify voters. So if they know that a person actually cast a ballot, would they actually send someone to your house and knock on your door? That is what the Department of Justice is concerned with, voter intimidation, because who's going to come to the door? The cyber ninjas? And what are they going to be wearing? And how is that going to make people feel about their ability to vote freely?
David Plouffe, Ryan took us there. Enter the Department of Justice, who today asserted publicly that there are concerns about the illegality of those two aspects of this specifically. One, voter intimidation by going out 6 months after an election and making contact with voters as part of their faux audit. And two, the possession by sort of out in the open conspiracy theorists of fraud that doesn't exist. So say the Republican officials in the state who engaged in 3 recounts to dispel distrust. What is the sort of urgency in your view for the Justice Department to be aggressive here?
It couldn't be more urgent, Nicole, and I think it's terrific that you continue to spend considerable time on this, because this is a DEFCON 1 moment for democracy. We're not threatened by other nations or enemies. It's a threat from within. Democracy is hanging by the thinnest thread in our country's history. And what's happening in Phoenix, Arizona, it should be happening across the border in Roswell, New Mexico. It's just crazy town. By the way, there's no question that at the end of this ridiculous theatricality, the collection of white nationalists and QAnon supporters and Trump cult members are going to say, Trump should have won Arizona. We already know the outcome. But this is deadly serious. The Department of Justice needs to be all over this, not just in Arizona, but all these efforts around the country. What's puzzling to me, Nicole, is you've got all these Republican elected officials who are in office because they chose to participate in the theater of democracy. And I'm not sure we've ever seen people in America hate democracy this much, because basically what they want to do is enshrine themselves in power. And they're doing it because they're fearful of this ridiculous, shameful, historically incompetent cult leader down in Mar-a-Lago, who they all traipsed down there and pledge allegiance to. And none of them got into politics because they thought they were going to be weak-kneed and bending the ring to a cult leader. But that's where they found themselves. The issues are secondary. Their own careers, in many respects, are secondary to this fact. And so everybody who's concerned about this country, not about who wins the next election or the one after that, but the entire enterprise is at risk here. This is an existential threat. And so it's great to see DOJ getting involved. You see a lot of groups like Mark Elias's starting to file lawsuits. But what ultimately needs to happen here, and this won't solve all this, is Congress must act. They must pass voting rights legislation. And if they don't, because a few Democratic senators decide that protecting the filibuster, which of course has its roots in slavery and racism, you're going to basically protect that so that our democracy and our country can be handed over in permanence to a party that increasingly is comfortable with white nationalism at its core, is erotic is not a strong enough word. It would be tragic.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.